Ladies and gentlemen, hey, hi, how you doing? Welcome back to the channel. Thank you so much for stopping by with the new Season 4 Reloaded update here in Warzone and Black Ops 6. We obviously saw a pretty significant meta update. We got the full patch notes yesterday, and it was one of the most detailed meta updates that we've ever seen in Warzone history, not because it was direct impacts on a ton of weapons per se, but rather because it was a heavy attachment focus update. They buffed so many different attachments for almost every gun in the game. They did also make some other interesting choices though, and as we've been sort of doing recently with some of the major seasonal updates, when the updates drop, I like to do sort of a general new meta update overview. Later on this week, we'll be breaking down the top 10 loadouts you want to use, going through our entire tier list and ranking all the weapons after the update to see what lands in absolute meta, what's a contender, what's not worth using at all. But in this video, I want to break down sort of what this update does to the general meta, a little bit category by category, and explain a few things to look out for as you're jumping into your first few matches of Season 4 Reloaded. First up here, COD Community. We use the site all the time for TTK references. The tier list that I just mentioned, we use off the site as well. They post this great graphic every time there's a larger meta update here, sort of summarizing things. Then we'll talk some specifics here, but you can see there were a lot of different updates, basically talking about the various different attachment buffs to rapid fire, recoil springs, gain twist, short barrel, ported compensator, lightweight foregrip, precision, ergonomic, CQB, fast motion laser, the target laser, the combat stock. All these things saw significant increases across the board for a bunch of different weapons, which in turn is not necessarily always going to change up your meta builds, but it will make the ones you've been running more effective in their specific situations. So you can really tune to what you want to, be effective in, whether it is medium to long range, whether it's sniper support, hip fire builds, whatever the case is, you can really optimize those things to a greater extent now, which is good. But the general thing I want to focus on here is that something we always talk about is typically when the meta is in a good state, it's because weapons are being buffed to be in the competitive level, not taking the best guns in the game and nerfing them to be on a mediocre level. In the past, they've done a lot of that, including to start the year. In recent seasons, though, they focus more on doing heavy buffs to bring things up. And as you can see in this general graphic here, some of these weapons did see some buffs and some nerfs, like the Striker, for instance, some other choices here. But the bulk of the changes that we saw were buffs, increasing velocity, increasing damage in some cases, increasing range in some cases, and then one more distinct nerf to the Krig, which was by far the absolute meta this last half season. So fantastic news here from just a top-down standpoint of going in and buffing things to make them more on the level of the best options rather than taking the best options and bringing them all down lower. If you're a fan of faster TTK, this is typically a good thing. If you're not a fan of the super fast TTK, you might not love this, but in general, it does promote a healthier meta when we see a situation like this where there's a lot of green and a little bit less red, or at least not the majority of it being red as opposed to green. Now, focusing a little bit more on the specifics here, and as we do so, by the way, if you guys enjoy the video, you find the information helpful, a like rating is always seriously appreciated. If you're new to the channel, you want to ensure that each and every day you're up to date with all things going on in COD, be sure to hit that subscribe button, turn on those post notifications. We are, of course, on the road to 1 million subscribers, so much love to anyone who appreciates the content enough to subscribe. But when we're looking at the general meta updates, obviously we covered these in full in the patch note video from yesterday, so feel free to check that out if you haven't caught it yet. Going from category to category here, you can sort of see the trends that I think are good, but also weird at the same time. And I'll explain more as we go through, but we can see with the rifles, the bulk of the changes here are the attachment buffs that we just covered, which I think is a good thing. I don't think it's necessarily going to make it so that your AK setup is a complete 180 from what you were running this last half season or the past few seasons. It's going to optimize your setups more, but you see these attachment updates for a bunch of these options before we get into the actual tuning of the Krig, basically down here with the range nerfs, balancing that out some, the multiplier nerfs as well, just making it a little bit less effective over range. This is not a nerf that kills the Krig, and they've also talked about that. They don't want to take guns that are the absolute meta unless it's something crazy, overpowered, broken, which the Krig was clearly the best, but it wasn't broken per se. They're taking this gun that was the #1 choice and now making it, a 1A, a 1B, a 1C versus some other top rifles, right? So that's an important nerf, but not one that kills it. That's a good thing. You then, though, get into the other trend that we didn't see as much of previously outside of like Season 3 Reloaded, which did it a lot, and then they negated it all with Season 4, and that's focusing on the old era guns, or the old games guns, MW2 and MW3 options. They buffed a ton of them with Season 3 Reloaded, and the meta was in one of the best possible spots because there were so many guns you could use and actually use effectively from MW2, MW3, and Black Ops 6. And then Season 4 just buffed Black Ops 6 guns, and it kind of made these older games guns obsolete again. They just sort of negated all the work they just did. This isn't drastically going to change the meta, although these are some pretty significant buffs to the STG and like the M13B. These could be really, really good choices that we'll detail more specifically in the coming days, so stay tuned. But it gives these an options to contend, and it doesn't make them useless. At the same time, you clearly can see these guns here are not getting the same treatment as all of these other guns. Like the Black Ops 6 options are going to feel more efficient, more effective, more natural than these older games guns. And I think this sort of highlights the problem with the current way that Warzone is laid out. When you have 150 guns, you can make some really solid updates to things like this that are going to make the meta and gameplay feel more like Warzone 1, which is considered peak, right? Lower recoil, high velocity, efficient weapons for the mid to long range, and then aggressive close range options to balance that out. You're doing that and highlighting that well, and we're getting to a point where these Black Ops 6 options are going to feel more and more like that, but you're leaving behind some of these older choices when you're not doing as much to them, and you're still not fully, going after the feel and behavior and performance of these guns. Yes, they're getting some range buffs, some damage buffs and whatnot, and a little bit of reduced visual recoil, but it's not to the same extent and not to the same focus. Now, is that because these updates for the attachments are also pasted over to multiplayer as well, so Treyarch's really focusing on this, then it just happens to apply to Warzone as well? Is it because they don't want to, have much attention on these older games guns? And if that's the case, what's the point in having 100 of them in the game? It's a larger conversation, but it highlights an issue there. Is there too much going on that the meta can't properly be balanced across the, general titles, and it's got to just focus the premium one? Obviously, there's more focus on incentivizing the current game to get you to buy it, get you to spend time on it, but it's an interesting thing to note. But we don't ultimately see a ton of shift in the rifle category. We just see a few more contenders rise up here. The SMG category, again, sees a lot of these efficiency-based updates, but it doesn't actually change much because you're not seeing much tuning outside of attachments to the LC10, the clear standout, the C9 a close second, right? You have some more MW2, MW3 options being adjusted, which is solid, but maybe not in the case that, again, is going to give every single one of these a fighting chance. It makes them not completely garbage, but it's not going to put them over the hump that they're still trying to get over. And again, is that because there's just not enough time to pay enough attention to a lot of these? The other category I want to look at, well, yes, we do see some updates to shotguns, to LMGs, is the sniper category, because they did pay a lot of attention to this in specific, and I think did a really good job with this because there's going to be a lot of options here. Previously, when it comes to snipers, it was the HDR above everything, obviously, right? And then behind that, you had things like the Cat, which could infinite one-shot, but it still felt kind of clunky. The AMR, which could infinitely one-shot, but still felt kind of clunky. And then things like the LR762, the Frostline, the Kar 98K, that had limited one-shot ranges that were decent, but clearly a step behind the HDR. These all benefit from the same attachment updates, which is solid. The AMR Mod 4 hopefully won't feel as awkward in some cases. The HDR gets even better, which is crazy. LR762, again, maybe going to be a little bit more efficient. Same deal with the Frostline. No one's looking at the SVD. The Cat becomes a little bit more efficient. Again, though, not on the same level as some of these other attachment updates because there's not as much attention being paid to this, but it at least gets better. They make the Moore's one-shot range. The Charge Barrel obviously gives you that infinite one-shot, which is solid as is. The Imperium getting a larger one-shot range is huge there as well, also increasing the damage to the multipliers are going to be more efficient. MCPR, longer one-shot range. The Victus becoming an infinite one-shot headshot. They're introducing competition. This is what I said back before this seasonal update happened, Reloaded happened, is that when it's just the HDR, yeah, the sniper meta is really good. It's also really boring because you have one choice. Now, if you prefer the feel of the Victus to the HDR, you've got some options. You can bounce back and forth between the two. If you like the feel of the MCPR more than the LR762 or the Frostline, you can bounce back and forth there. They did definitely define the sniper meta a little bit more. I do think there's still a slight imbalance when a few specific choices can infinite one-shot headshot and others are stuck to like 70-meter one-shot headshots. You don't have much of an incentive to run those lesser options, but they're there if it applies to your gameplay, basically, right? Overall, though, this meta update does bring things more in line with what Warzone 1 would feel like on Verdansk and in the general meta with how guns play there. It doesn't necessarily balance the meta out across the games as much, but it does trend in the right direction of buffing things rather than hard nerfing things, and promoting weapons that are going to be easier, more welcoming to all styles of play, which hopefully is going to translate to being a good thing here. So overall, this meta update seems decent for sure. In the coming days, as I mentioned, we'll be covering specific weapons, focusing on a few unique loadouts, the general top 10, breaking down the entire meta update with our tier list. So stay tuned for all that alongside everything else going on in COD by hitting that subscribe button. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to drop a like on your way out. But once again, thank you so much for tuning in. And until next time, take it easy, have an awesome rest of your day, and I'll catch you later. Peace out.